welcome to the BloodStream Podcast, a show serving the greater bleeding disorders community, brought to you by Believe Limited and BloodStream Media, and made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. I am your patient advocate and host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I am your healthcare advocate, nonprofit nerd, and your other host, Amy Board, reminding you to please speak with a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions.
On today's show, the first of 2023. It is 2023.
2023.
In spite of what I continue to write in emails on documents and checks. And
you write checks?
I do write. I have to pay for stuff. I have to.
No.
pay for my life.
Nobody but my dad still writes checks, and he writes checks. He writes so many checks.
Well, I probably don't write that many checks, but it's, a few days into the new year. I had to write my accountant a check. He does my taxes, and he's old school.
You didn't Venmo your accountant?
Wendell is not going to take my Venmo. Are you kidding me? I got to put ink to paper if I want to pay Wendell.
Oh my
Shout
gosh,
out to
Tom
accountants.
Board is psyched right now.
And shout out to Tom Board. So yes, I write checks and I keep writing 2022, but it's not. It's 2023. It's true. And you're allowed to still write checks. It's not. It wasn't banned.
Right, it's not banned.
No, it's not. We do have a new Congress. They just set some new rules, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't
It's
involve.
too soon to bring up that.
Yeah, maybe it is. But we are going to have Nathan Schaefer from NHF's policy team on next month, so he will bring us into the world of Congress politics and advocacy
Looking
pretty
forward
soon.
to that.
As am I. But that is for later. For today, we've got Jessica Lauren Richmond, and she is back to take us to and from The Well. For a segment featuring 5 steps to make your New Year's resolutions stick.
Oh, I need that one today.
Yeah, well, hey,
Yes.
you've come to the right place, Amy Board.
Love it.
That is today. It's coming up soon and will be followed by our interview with Aditi Kantipuly. She's a research collaborator for the CDC. She is a scientist, physician, writer, and musician. How about that lineup?
Yep.
That's coming up a bit later. We have got all of that and more on this episode, first of the year. Welcome to BloodStream.
Hey, listeners, as always, thank you for joining Patrick and me here on BloodStream. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast and follow BloodStream Media on social media. Or don't, but we're there if
We
you
are
want
there,
to.
and we'd prefer if you did.
I suggested it's a blast.
Listeners, I also want to remind you that the BloodStream Podcast is made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda.
Takeda.
Yes, that's right, Takeda. Takeda's got this website, bleedingdisorders.com, where you can learn all about Takeda's resources for and commitment to the bleeding disorders community. Takeda believes in a world free of bleeds, Amy Board. And they are dedicated more than ever in their efforts to offer a wide range of programs and support to help patients throughout their treatment journey, wherever on that journey they may be. You can learn more by simply visiting bleedingdisorders.com. That's all you got to do. One more time, though you probably don't need it, bleedingdisorders.com. And for their founding and ongoing support of the BloodStream Podcast, I would just like to say thanks, Takeda.
Thanks, Takeda. Clearly, I've had coffee this morning.
You have. I can see it in your Stop the Bleeding mug right there. Shouts out, STB Hemo.
I know. OMG.
And hey, listen, thanks, Takeda, not just for this episode, but for 2023, because listeners,
yes,
BloodStream Podcast is official in 2023.
Yes!
Takeda,
that means you get us all year long.
All year long, at least twice a month. At least twice a month. Although you're going to hear about bonus episodes by the end of this episode. So we're already at one episode into the year.
Happening.
We're already into bonus episodes. But
I know.
Thank you, Takeda, for your continued commitment to BloodStream and the unique place that we have within the bleeding disorders community, which I think is only getting more and more important because, Amy Board, as you know, on our very next episode, Jan 27th, we're going to have the one and only Dr. Stephen Pipe on to talk about hemophilia B gene therapy, given that Hemgenics has now been approved.
Yes.
So I think what we're doing here is as important as ever. Thank you, Takeda, for continuing to support it. And listeners, next week, Dr. Stephen Pipe is on to talk about Hemgenics, hemophilia B, AAV gene therapy in an extended interview. You are not going to want to miss that. We also, throughout the year, are going to be previewing new segments. You've previously heard us talk with James Maple about the new music and story segment that we're working on. In fact, James and I were at an event this weekend talking to a couple of musicians who are going to contribute to that segment. If you're interested, mailbag at bloodstreammedia.com for the new music segment. Amy and I are also talking about something for Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month. So listeners, you can look forward to all the stuff you've come to know BloodStream for, news, interviews, and informed opinionating, the Let's Talk segment and the Well, all the great stuff we do. And we're going to look to preview and pilot some new segments and some new things for you as well. So Thank you for continuing to listen and commit to the show. If you weren't doing that, there'd be no reason for us to do this. There'd be no reason for Takeda to continue to support it. And I want to give a special shout out to some listeners who I did just meet at the Nacho conference, the camp conference that took place in Arizona earlier this month, actually just last week. I was there, and a few of you who were there came up to me, and some of you I've never seen or met before, but you wanted me to know that you're a listener, and you were very thankful for the information. So thank you for saying that. Any of you who ever come up to Amy or I or anybody on the team to let us know that you listen and that you appreciate, or to give suggestions, criticism, feedback, anything like that's you engaging with the show, it means a tremendous amount. That's ultimately what all the effort's about. So those moments really fill my cup, and I just want to say thank you to those at Nacho who came up to say hi, and thank you, and I hope I hear from more of you throughout the calendar year.
And no one has ever said to me that there's too much Taylor Swift content on this podcast.
Not
and
yet.
I fish. I'm like, is there too much? And no one says it. So
2023 goals.
2023.
If you want to make that resolution
Full steam
stick,
ahead.
How to get people finally asking you to rein it in, you're going to have to stick around to listen to the Let's Talk segment coming up in just a little bit. But before we get into that, we're actually not the Let's Talk segment, the Well segment. Shouts out to the Let's Talk segment as well, though. Actually, on the Let's Talk segment, I will mention, because that Dr. Pipe interview is an extended conversation about hemogenics, hemophilia B gene therapy, the Let's Talk segment that would run on that episode is actually going to be a standalone on February 3rd. So you got a few episodes coming up in the next 4 weeks here from BloodStream. So we'll get into now the Well with Jessica Lauren Richmond, talking about determining the boundaries between expectations and reality, as it is a key for making sure you can stick to your resolutions and resolve. But Amy, first, just before the year came to an end, Congress ended for the year. And I promise I'm not going back to New Rules Congress jokes from last week. But there was a legislative package that was approved in the 11th hour, or the 23rd hour, or whatever hours, like right at the end. And there were several wins, but also several disappointments in that package for the rare disease community. So can you just, in like 2-3 minutes, just kind of walk us through what was that package, and what are the wins and what are the losses?
Right. As you guys know, we have such a strong advocacy community here in the hemophilia and bleeding disorder space. These end-of-year legislative packages are usually budget, appropriations packages that kind of like, lump a whole bunch of stuff in there. And there were several wins for the rare disease community that NORD and a coalition of their partners have kind of pushed through. It's notable that NHF and HFA were not a part of this coalition. But there were several things I think of note, more for what was not included, which I think is interesting. But as a part of this end of year package, and if you guys are nerdy about this bill was HR 2617, so you can get nerdy about it. We will put all of this information in the program notes if you guys want to kind of like read through, because I know several of you guys like to read through.
Love to read
stuff.
a good HR.
Just a few. But what they did put through was to strengthen the FDA's accelerated approval pathway to ensure healthcare providers and insurance companies can continue to have confidence in drugs approved through this critical pathway,
That's
which
good.
I think
That's
is interesting.
important.
They reauthorized several grants programs for orphan products. Also, Best Pharmaceuticals for Children's Act program, which is through NIH, which is great. And they also increased, which I think this is fantastic. They have also, I don't know how they're going to do this.
Okay.
But they voted to ensure increased representation of diverse and underserved populations in clinical trial programs supporting FDA approval of drugs and medical devices.
My guess is it may be mandated with certain trial criteria that there is representation and diversity included in the patients enrolled in the trial. So I'm with you. I don't know how they're going to enforce it either. It seems important that it's at least on paper as a priority and something that in theory will be protected. It will be interesting to see how it's actually implemented and monitored.
Exactly. What Congress decided to not move forward with are several critical measures that I'm sure NORD and this coalition will continue to rally behind. And these three measures I think are very interesting and something that we as a bleeding disorder community should be aware of.
Okay.
The first is the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act, which would have created an improved and streamlined provider enrollment process when children with Medicaid and or CHIP coverage need to access out-of-state medical care. critical for rare disease,
Yeah, for
ultra rare
sure.
disease. I think it's interesting here in the hemophilia community in terms of now we have a hemophilia B gene therapy product on the market. Dr. Pipe is going to talk about this next week, but there is you could be dosed at one center and then followed at another. How is that going to be facilitated,
What does that
paid
mean
for,
yeah,
all of those
exactly.
things? So and of course, gene therapy will not be for kids. This is specifically for kids on
Right,
Medicaid
right.
and
We're not talking
CHIP.
about gene therapy here.
However, it's interesting. So I think that's something interesting to follow.
I'm curious about that too.
The next one is the Medical Nutrition Equity Act, which would have lifted an enormous financial weight off the shoulders of people who depend on medically formulated foods by mandating insurance coverage of medical nutrition products for people with certain health conditions.
Wow.
And this is big, 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 big. And I think it's going to be kind of like, again, one of those paradigm shifts in terms of what, insurance, Medicaid, especially Medicaid and Medicare, will pay for in terms of medically formulated foods, which is just really important. And then the third, which I think is absolutely critical, which blows my mind that they didn't move forward with this, is the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Reauthorization Act. So this would have provided resources to improve the state programs that already exist, but it would improve those programs that screen newborns for a complete panel of disorders and educate parents and providers about those disorders.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, funding was included for the National Academy of Medicine to conduct a study and to make recommendations on ways to modernize and improve newborn screening. So hopefully, the funding for that study will help move that along. But as we know from our friends and our peers in the rare and ultra rare community, those newborn screenings are something that they have advocated for decades.
Our friends at the Jeffrey Modell Foundation, I'm sure, were not pleased with this result.
So, I think it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that study of how to modernize and improve newborn screenings. But it's interesting that they didn't just, put money to improve those programs. So that's something to look forward to. And of course, a great place to keep updated on all this stuff, rare, is to follow NORD on their social media and their news. And I'm sure they have a newsletter and things.
Yeah.
But that organization is fantastic.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's where I first saw information about this as well.
Yeah.
I'd be curious, why do you think it is that NHF and HFA weren't a part of this?
I am curious as well. You and I had a back and forth about it, which I think is interesting, and I think we should ask Nathan or our policy folks at NHF and HFA when they join us here. We're getting geared up, community, for Washington Days, which will be in person in March, which is cool. So advocacy is starting. State House Days are getting up and running. What a interesting year I think it will be. I think it's going to be kind of a more difficult year to get things through, but in terms of our critical funding for our treatment centers and things like that, it will be an important year for us to show up. So we will have those people on BloodStream here in the next few weeks, and I say we ask.
I think that's a good idea. March 8th through the 10th is the National Hemophilia Foundation's Washington Days, the day of federal lobbying. Notable in 2022, a record close to 400 attendees from 45 states and Puerto Rico gathered virtually for the community advocacy event. It was virtual the last 3 years as a result of COVID. It will be interesting to see now that it is in person again. What does that mean for the number of people that showed up? Listeners have heard me say this before, but I think many of us can, identify that last time we were on a plane or that last big group event that we were a part of in Q1 of 2020 before COVID changed everything. And for me, it was Washington Days. That was my last trip before COVID. It's an interesting moment in time coming up upon the 2023 Washington Days to think about the last few years. But just from an engagement standpoint, I'll be curious what the overall numbers are. And to your point, Amy, when we talk to Nathan as we get closer to Washington Days and learn about what are the priorities that NHF has set forward for the community during those days, to learn a little bit more about, hey, this big thing that went and was important for rare disease, and there's a lot of, some stuff went, some stuff didn't go. NHF, HFA weren't participating. Why? I'm sure there's reason. I just don't know what it is. So cool. Thanks for running through that with us. That was really helpful, interesting context for some stuff that may have flown under the radar as it was, the 11th hour, the 23rd hour of the 57, whatever hours just before the end. So thanks, Amy Board. Okay, The Well with Jessica Lauren Richmond. You want to stick to your New Year's resolutions? I do.
I do.
She is going to help us do that. She's got a 5-step guide that are going to help us be our best selves this year. No pressure, Jessica Lauren Richmond, but that's what we're setting you up to deliver today on The Well.
4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! Woo-hoo!
I think for me, when I'm offered a new opportunity, I try to jump at it as much as possible, but I got to be realistic. I do have a bleeding disorder, and I want to live for a long time. So I want to really be smart about how I approach any new activity.
It is January 2023 at the Well, and we are going to discuss resolve, resolution, determination to completion, acceptance. By definition, resolve is to find a solution to a dispute or problem, or to decide firmly on a course of action. With the new year here, and with sobering traditions like the turning of the calendar to a new business quarter, or the dry January, aka alcohol-free living of those who generally prefer to imbibe, it's a time to recenter on beginnings, on new habits. A great time to create new boundaries between expectation and reality. Welcome to the Well.
We are standing by a wishing well.
Maybe you're resolved to create a new world for yourself, one where your health and fitness are in the lead, one where you stress less about the small shiza. Perhaps you're aiming to let go of a bad habit, an unhelpful dependency, quit smoking or sugar. Maybe you're starting a new venture, tackling a big project with a hard-line due date. Whatever you're doing this year that's new for you, dealing with limitations of reality requires some amount of strategy. Today at the Well, for your consideration, a 5-step guide to successful resolutions. To help illustrate the steps, we are listening to Corey, who was recorded at HFA 2022. He shares about his resolve to take opportunity.
Something I talked about earlier was climbing a mountain to go to a friend's wedding recently, and that was certainly a kind of a scary and daunting proposition. But I know that through my own sort of preparation and training, and over the past couple of years, that I thought that was something I could do.
Preparation to attempt something new requires the decision to do the thing. Corey had done his risk analysis and consideration for the opportunity. We'll note here the simplicity of what step 1 is for successful resolutions. Step 1, be resolved. Then what?
I knew that there was going to be a good support team around me, just in my friends being there. There was about 20, 25 people that went up the mountain that day, and everybody knew I had a bleeding disorder, and they knew the reality that something possibly could happen, but everybody had my back in that moment.
Aha, step 2. Acknowledgement of contexts that may challenge your resolve, and matching those challenges with support. In Corey's case, a surrounding group of informed individuals.
I think whenever I'm doing something, I try to not do it alone. I think that's a really important thing to remember when doing any kind of new scary activity, is if you go at it alone, there's a lot that can go wrong. But if you have other people around you who know your situation and who can lift you up if you're sliding down a little bit, that's super important.
Step 3. And this can be a tricky one depending on the activity. Not doing it alone. Well, not doing all of it alone. The resolution that comes first in our step-by-step guide here, that is a solo activity of the brain. And step 2, acknowledging challenges, may be done alone. But at some point, letting others share in the knowledge of what you are resolved to do, that is a part of bringing a resolution into reality. Of course, to share something, one must first know one's own brain, one's own body, whole self, really. Right, Corey?
I think the other key part about trying new things is really understanding yourself and what you're capable of. You have to be realistic and know your own body and what you're capable of. And unfortunately, a lot of people with bleeding disorders probably don't get as much experience in terms of their limits in certain ways. And in other ways, they know their limits far better than probably anybody else on this planet, but not in every way. And I think without trying some of these new activities and taking baby steps towards them, it's really hard to know what your limits are.
So we had step 4, know thyself, and rounding us out is step 5, knowing your limits. Now this is different than acknowledging challenges that might need support, step 2. This step 5, it's what makes resolve peaceful. Limitations are not there to constrain possibilities. They're there to help clarify reality. So when considering the new year and what you may be resolved to do, we're shouting out a reminder from the well. You can do whatever you want as long as you negotiate with the way things are to get there. And in this way, limitations can help shape opportunity. Next time at the well, we'll dive a bit deeper into how else limitations can be freeing. Thanks to Corey for support creating this 5-step recipe for resolve. Thanks to BloodStream Media for having me on. This is Jessica, and I wish you well.
Thank you, Jessica Lauren Richmond, as always, for your wisdom and grace.
Wisdom and grace.
When talking about New Year's resolutions.
Wisdom and grace.
Listeners, let's get to my interview with Aditi Kantipuly. She is a scientist. She is a physician. She has an interest in art and music. She is all of the things.
I love it.
And we talk about all the things. We talk about health equity. We talk about how the pain crisis is different for people with color and how art and music offer healing. It's good. Let's get into it.
Let's get it.
Listeners, I am so excited for you to hear our next guest. She has the best background, I think, of any guest we've had this year on BloodStream. Over the last 15 years, Aditi has been working with families affected by a rare genetic condition, initially as a scientist and now as a physician. But the coolest thing, apart from being a scientist, she is also a writer and a musician. What a wonderful guest we have today. Aditi, tell me a little bit about yourself and how did you arrive at where you are today?
Thank you so much for that incredible bio. So I got interested in genetics at a very young age. The idea of genes and how they're so microscopic and we can't even see them to the eye, but it can have such an incredible macro impact blew my mind. I was like 10 years old at that realization. And I just ended up following that curiosity and then staying in this space because I loved it. So that's how I found myself here. When I was in graduate school at Hopkins, I was listening to a lot of lectures, not by professors or, specialists in the rare disease space, but they were working on health disparities in a different lens. And those talks were extremely inspiring. And the dean of my graduate school, he said, a physician can help hundreds of families over a lifetime, but people in public health, they impact millions. And so I want to carry that philosophy forward as a physician, and that kind of always stuck with me. So here I am.
You do a lot of work in health equity. And so just to ask a basic question, define it a little bit. What is health equity?
Health equity is really meeting people where they are and what their circumstances are, and how do we access health in a way that is going to provide them with the best mental, emotional, physical well-being with their circumstances. So if I could give you an example, let's say we are at a playground and the teacher has 2 Band-Aids and I have a bigger scab. So it's equitable to give us both 2 Band-Aids, even if you don't have a Band-Aid, and that just would make things equal. But is it really right if I have the bigger scab and you don't have a scab for you to get a Band-Aid? So that's what it is. It really boils down to meeting people in the circumstances that they're in and guaranteeing the right to health.
Talk a little bit about your work in health equity. What are you doing? What are the national conversations? What is going on now today here in the States?
One big thing is, I think, the legislation and the insurance providers and how different providers have different policies and different states have different legislations. I know of parents that are moving states just to have better care for their medically complex child. Yeah. They have to uproot their life.
Yes.
Because that state has better coverage. We are called the United States of America, but are we really united when different states have different ways about providing health to the citizens? So that's one big thing that I'm hearing from families. And I just don't think that's equitable health when we can't be all uniform on the same page about health. It's such a basic necessity. Why is it this complicated?
Right.
Why do insurance providers have different rules? And as a physician, it's a hard system to navigate. And I think it's equally hard for families as well to navigate the medical system. So really trying to advocate and push for this idea that it's a partnership. It's a partnership between the provider and the patient. We need to hear from you to give you the best healthcare that you need. Even if you feel like, oh, like I'm taking up too much time or space. No, you're never taking up too much time or space. Like, we're here to listen.
From your perspective as a provider, tell me a little bit, how is the pain crisis in rare genetic conditions like hemophilia, for example, different for people of color?
That's a really good question that you bring up. And I'm reminded by one interaction we had in the hospital of a patient. He had sickle cell, and it was me, my attending, a resident, and we went in. And generally what happens is we go into the room, the doctor assesses the patient, we watch our attending. He was wincing with a lot of pain. Like, it was quite evident that he was having a pain crisis. So as soon as we come out of the room, we have a short clinical debrief. And I remember my attending said, he's just faking it. This was a person of African-American origin, young man, like 21. And that's what he had to say. I kind of grappled with it because where I am in the hierarchy, I can't question my attending. I can't say, no, but I think he's in a lot of pain, because whatever the attending says with their experience is what goes in the management. I recently came across a study where it said they did a survey of healthcare providers, and 50% of the people that they surveyed had said that they were of this notion that Black people had less sensitive nerves. So they were under prescribing for pain, or it's these biases that are percolating in the medical circles in terms of how we are providing care to people of color and minorities. And I've seen it myself, and I couldn't question it. But then when I read studies like this that are coming out in literature, it's so validating to know, like, okay, this is the perception that the attending might have had. It's tough to see this. It's tough to speak up. But now I'm more vocal about these things, because as I'm reading the literature and people are seeing these perceptions that are true, that it's not just me and it's not just in my head. It's like, these are facts that we are faced to reconcile with.
We hear stories like that from our sickle cell warriors here on the network all the time. It's an issue that they face all the time. As a provider, what guidance can you give to patients in that situation dealing with medical staff? Is there anything that you would give a bit of guidance for patients as they face those barriers to care?
The medical care team is not just composed of the physician, it's the nurse. You have multidisciplinary care, especially when you're on an inpatient admission. Right. So there's different contact points of interacting with your medical care team. So making sure that if you are in pain, like, everyone on that medical care team knows that the nurse that comes to see you, the nutritionist that comes to see you, the OT, PT, whatever your situation is, but there are multiple people on that team. So if you're not being heard by one person, please express this to somebody else that may be able to, like, counter check the physician. If you can't get your message through to one person, the most obvious solution is to tell someone else. And hopefully they're there to listen. Like, we do want the best care for you. That's what our job is, and to deliver the best care. So that would be my advice, is to being assertive and making sure that the whole medical team is aware of your needs. And it's not just the prescribing physician. Different physicians come in at different points, like treating physicians. It's not just one physician that's consistent on that one stay. And when that new physician comes in, they don't really know what's going on, like what happened the past couple days, the 5 days that you were having these pain crises. So keeping your own notes, I think, would be really helpful to show them. I know it's documented in the chart. As providers, we document things, but also if you have a book and then you write down, okay, this is the time, this is the pain level that I had, and you show it to the physician, you have something objective to go by.
I actually saw a Twitter thread a while ago from a rare disease patient. This was specifically dealing with her chronic pain and her migraine pain. She had a book, like a diary book of everything that she had been prescribed and like all of her records and all the things. And every time she went into the ER, she showed this book and it like immediately, it streamlined because it was like, she's not making this up. I thought it was brilliant. I was like, oh my gosh, that is great advice.
Every point that you interact with a healthcare provider,
Right.
not just a physician, I'm talking about the medical team, have that documented.
Right.
So it doesn't get lost in transition.
Speaking of transition, let's transition a little bit. Tell me how you use art and music in your professional life and how this helps patients. I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah, so the art and music, my first project with art started, I went to India and for a Fulbright to study rare genetic conditions. And every state of India, I met a family with a rare disease. And one of the most striking stories of a father that I met with was a father who 6 of his 8 children were diagnosed with a rare neurological condition. And he petitioned the government of India to euthanize his children because he wasn't able to care for them.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm just kind of shocked. What happened?
It wasn't accepted. He was really just trying to bring attention that he needed the support and resources to
Right.
really care for his kids. And
Right.
like he had to go to that extreme to get people to notice what his struggle was. And that's how I interpreted his actions. He was in dire need. Like he didn't know what to do. And he thought, and it did work. It was being covered by all media, top media. It did bring the attention that it needed, but that really pushed me to share all the stories of the families that I've met. I think one thing in the rare disease space is it's hard to get people to, especially if you don't have a rare condition, to really understand what's going on in the rare community. And like getting the attention of someone to care about rare is even harder. So I think that's where art comes in. Art's like a universal connector.
Yeah.
It can elicit certain emotions that can't be expressed in the written word. We can think of new ways about even thinking of things when we look at art.
Yeah.
So that's where the inspiration for my first children's book came out, called The Zebra Alphabet. And what's universal? The alphabet, right? A lot of people are learning the English language. And so to introduce this concept, rare diseases, along with the alphabet, are like to marriage these very heart-wrenching stories, but to present it in a different way, in a different light, because that's what we need. We need hope. We need light in a very dark
Right.
space. So
That's fantastic. What was the title again? The Zebra Alphabet?
yeah, Zebra Alphabet.
That's fantastic. And where can listeners find out about that book and try to get it for their own?
You can contact me directly on Instagram, thezebraalphabet.com.
Fantastic. Thezebraalphabet.com. We'll have that in the program notes. Oh, Aditi, I love that. Last question as we kind of wind down. Tell me a little bit about how social interactions can modulate inflammation in our bodies. And I'm fascinated about this question. I'm fascinated with inflammation, but just how can some of that social interaction really help that?
We know that inflammation is a driver of disease. It can make pre-existing conditions worse, or it can even trigger new diseases to appear. So my own thought process around this is that if we can build stronger connections with our local community, either physically or virtually, that can be used as a buffer to sort of drive these inflammatory levels down. And that's what I mean by social immunity. And it's not a term that I came up with. This was a term that was actually derived by ecologists in 2007. And when they initially, like one example was that they had used is bees in a hive. They're all working together in cooperativity, and they actually collect resin from outside and they bring it in to the beehive because that acts as an antimicrobial substance. And so if we think about like on an evolutionary perspective, animals, bees, humans too, there is a push for being cooperative in our own community and building those connections. I think we're evolutionary programmed for that. I think that's where it fits in terms of building a social immunity means building connection so we can drive the levels of inflammation down.
Well, Aditi, thank you so much for joining me today. This was wonderful. Again, where can our listeners follow you? You mentioned your Instagram. Is there anywhere else where we can follow your work?
I just I have Instagram for now. Yeah, feel free to send me a message or anything. Like, I'm always open to hearing about other people's experiences. And again, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That Instagram handle will be in the program notes. And Aditi, hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Jessica, for bringing us to and from the well. We will do our best to follow your guide and stick to our resolutions. For 37 years now, it's been more challenging than I'd like to admit, but maybe this is the year that my New Year's resolutions
2023
make it to February. Thank you, Aditi, as well, for contributing to today's episode. And the episode that would not be possible, of course, without our presenting sponsors' continued commitment, Takeda. Thanks, Takeda.
Thank you, Takeda.
Visit bleedingdisorders.com wherever on your journey you may be. And as mentioned earlier, our next episode features Dr. Stephen Pipe talking about hemophilia B gene therapy, the approval of Hemgenix, what to think about, what to talk to your doctor about, what his takeaways from the clinical trial were, what the 30 years that he and others have been working on this means in this moment. Amy, remind listeners when they can hear all that great stuff.
January 27th. Oh, mark your calendars because it's a wonderful conversation. It's an extended conversation with Dr. Pipe, and he's always wonderful. He's a terrific listen, and we just actually had that interview today, so we're not making it up.
No, yeah, we know that. It's very good.
We actually know it's great. No, but it's something of particular interest and importance, especially for hemophilia A patients, as well as we will continue to have those conversations for the hemophilia A community throughout the year. So it's super timely and it's wonderful, and it's going to be the bulk of that episode. So please check it out, January 27th. And also our Let's Talk segment with the legendary Joshua Sterling Bragg.
Great beard.
He does have a phenomenal beard. That will go live as a standalone episode or a pop-up bonus episode, whatever.
Yeah, pop-up bonus, standalone.
Which PJ loves. He loves a pop-up.
I love a good pop-up.
He loves it.
The moment we set our schedule for the year and then have approval for that schedule from our presenting sponsors' commitment is the moment I like to start throwing in some pop-up bonus episodes.
Yeah, it's a thing that happens every year. Anyway, that will be February 3rd.
5 weeks in, we're already getting to those pop-ups. Yeah, you know you're a part of Bloodstream when you're doing bonus episodes all the time. Anyway, so yeah, back on the 27th, Dr. Pipe. Then on the 3rd, we got the Let's Talk. Subscribe, listen, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell anybody you want. Do all those things. And with that, that is all for this episode. As always, remember to subscribe, listen, and share episodes of the Bloodstream podcast with friends, family, colleagues. If you or a loved one in the bleeding disorders community is a musician and you'd like to share your songs and story of those songs for a new segment on the pod, email mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com.
You can also use mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com to inquire about storytelling or casting opportunities for our podcast or Believe Limited's films. So you can email us and say, I have a story. Do you want to hear it? And you'll get to talk with me.
Most likely you will. That's true.
With me. And we can just see where you'd be a great fit. So please do that. We're always casting something. You can connect with us on Bloodstream Media, on the social media, all the things. Me, of course, Patrick James Lynch, everywhere. We're literally everywhere except for a few things.
Literally everywhere except for a few things. I am your host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm your other host, Amy Board.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.